Hey, and welcome to the show. I'm doing an intro to the intro for two reasons. One, as you listen to this and watch this, I want you to think about it from the perspective of you are his leader. And the second part is if you are his leader, do you really know everything that your employees are going through? Kind of do some self reflection on, do you really know what your employees are going through? Do you know the stressors that's going on in their personal lives? And are you treating them like people, or are we just treating them like assets at work? This episode, as I was recording it and editing it, kind of made me think in that perspective. And I wanted to offer that to you that you could listen to it and watch it from that perspective. The second part is I've never done this before, but in the descriptions is a link for Sam to help donate. After listening to this episode, if you feel inclined to help him and his wife out, the links are there for you to donate. Now let's get into the show. Hey, and welcome to another episode. Today we're joined by Sam Wegner, a man whose life story weaves together faith, perseverance, and a purpose in remarkable ways. Sam grew up in Italy as the son of church planting missionaries, and he found a call to ministry from an early age. But his path didn't take the traditional way. He took a 30-year career in information technology, but he never lost his passion for sharing hope and biblical truth. Over the years, Sam has served as a pastor, teacher, elder, missions coordinator, small group leader, and most recently as a chaplain for the young adults at Faith Bible Church in the Woodlands, Texas, where he's affectionately known as Uncle Sam. Regardless of the role that he's been in, his heart has always been to find ways to connect people to God's purpose in the midst of their hardest seasons in life. Sam's new book, The Weight of the Wait, was born from a deeply personal experience. He thought that he learned to manage the heaviness of waiting as he cared for his wife during her battle with breast cancer. But when the disease spread to her bones and became incurable, he began to feel the weight in a whole new way. Even as treatment slowed and the cancer progressed, it extended the waiting, and with it, the emotional burden. Looking for relief, Sam turned to scripture and discovered that God intentionally created waiting as a part of his design for spiritual growth. In The Weight of the Wait, he unpacks key biblical passages that explain why God makes us wait and how the waiting connects hope, faith, and transformation. Through honest stories of loss, joblessness, and endurance, Sam offers practical guidance for anyone who wants to find rest instead of being crushed by the weight of waiting. It's a powerful message for anyone struggling to hold on to hope. And I can't wait to hear from him today. So without further ado, Sam, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me on board, Tim. I'm really been looking forward to it.
I've been looking forward to having you on the show as well. So can you tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, so it's kind of a convergence of a couple of different paths. First, I'll start off with my own story. I've had about a 30-year career in information technology. Started out as a database administrator and then worked my way up into management. I was on a really successful track, and then things kind of went south. My boss that I had been with and worked for, who actually hired me for about 9 years, heard a rumor that wasn't true, believed it, and that basically turned her against me. And then for the next couple of years, things kind of went systematically downhill until eventually there was a restructuring, and she found an excuse to, throw me on the pile with everybody else. And that was about 18 months ago that happened. I've been out of work ever since. The other track is my wife's story, who about 10 years ago came down with breast cancer. And right as the world closed down due to COVID-19 in March of 2020, we received a metastatic diagnosis, which automatically makes it stage 4. And the tumors had metastasized to her bones. Fortunately, not her brain, liver, or lungs, which is where breast cancer tends to go as well, but just to her bones. I say just to her bones because any kind of bone cancer is extremely painful. So she's in incredible amounts of pain all the time. And we've been through multiple therapies that worked for a while, and then they stop. And then all of them have different kinds of side effects. None of them are pleasant. And sometimes the side effects are worse than the pain and the direct effects of the disease. So in the middle of the confluence of these two stories, God did a number on me. He exposed through a question that a friend asked me that I had a problem, and I thought my problem was with other people. I thought my problem was with grieving over the, imminent, although still future death of my wife. And what he showed me was instead that I had a problem with waiting. And as I tried to resolve that by searching through the scriptures to find an answer, he led me to a series of principles that I was not expecting to see, and kind of formed a framework that explained to me why we wait, how to wait better, how to actually participate in the growth process that comes from waiting. And then some friends encouraged me to write all that stuff down in a book. So I did. Just this past June, released The Weight of the Wait, where I talk about how all of this came together.
That's an incredibly powerful story, um, on all of that, and there's a lot there to unpack. So I I want to go back to the rumor first
Okay.
and how that really affected you, because I could only imagine how mentally that would weigh on you. You have work coming at you, your wife's illness, and then the layoff, and then everything else happens. So how did you kind of work through that portion?
So the very first part of it was the day after she had the conversation with me and confronted me with this thing, and I tried to deny it. I tried to uh, use my history and reputation with her as proof that this was not the kind of person that I was, and I wasn't successful in convincing her. I shared it with a good friend, my best friend, and he was irate. He was absolutely angry. And if you'd ever known him, you would know that that was completely out of his character. But he saw the injustice of it, and he just reacted strongly to it. And I found myself kind of pushing back on him and saying, no, no, wait a second. That's not how we're supposed to respond to this. And I used a phrase that David in the Bible used of King Saul before he actually became king. And that was, I will not lift my hand against the Lord's anointed. I viewed my boss as somebody who God had put in charge over me, had a responsibility to continue to do the best job that I could and to have a healthy and respectful attitude towards her, even though she didn't like me very much. And no matter how hard she tried to make life on me. And that was very freeing for me. It really came about that in that conversation, she said something, trying to kind of defend her position in this conversation. And what she said was, Sam, I made you who you are. Right? I gave you this job. I promoted you. I'm the one who made you. And that's when it clicked in my head. Sorry, that's not true. Right? I know who made me, and it's not you. I didn't say that to her, but I was thinking it. And I said, you know what? You just picked a fight with somebody a whole lot bigger than me. And being able to do that kind of allowed me to let that piece go. The problem that I had was realizing that everybody else around me was watching this. I could feel the eyeballs in the back of my head every single day. I was cognizant of the fact that every time I wrote an email, every time I spoke up in a meeting, every time I talked about a project, about her, I talked to her, I talked to somebody else who was talking about her, that I needed to be on guard and I needed to be professional and kind and Christ-like in how I responded to everything that was going on around me. And what I found was that people were paying attention and they were attracted to that. And they were asking me, how can you do this? They were encouraging me to go to HR and file a report. And I said, no, that's not how we're going to resolve this. And when they pointed out the injustice of this, that, or the other, or how difficult things were going to have to be because of how things were at the office, I said, you know what? These are the circumstances that we have to deal with. This is how we're going to do it. We're going to continue to do the right thing the right way for the right reasons. And it even came down to the point where eventually she gave 90% of my job responsibilities to somebody that I knew because she told me she didn't even want on her team. And so I supported that transition and tried to make him as successful as I possibly could. And I know that people were just scratching their heads saying, I don't get it. But that's what I needed to do. And so on the day that I was escorted out of the office, I did so probably for the first time in my life, being confident of the fact that I had actually handled that situation well. I had waited well through it, and I had been the representative of Christ Jesus that I needed to be in that situation, and I never regretted it.
So you make it sound so easy.
Well, sorry, didn't mean to do that because it is, but it isn't, you know?
Exactly. And so, having been in positions myself where, you feel targeted and feel people are out to get you, and it's coming, and you bring a unique perspective. And I'm glad you so openly talk about it as your faith and your belief in Jesus. So I just want you to take a quick moment on how that frames your leadership approach in this, because a lot of people would just, like you said, go straight to HR, fight fire with fire, ramp things up. I have an injustice being done to me. I need to do something about it. How did your faith play a large part into how you handle that situation?
Well, it really started on that very first day when I recognized that the attack, that the battle wasn't against me. It was against God. I could go on for another half hour and tell you how I believe the Lord gave me that job and how he led me to that job. But even without that, when I viewed the injustice that was being done to me, really wasn't directed at me. It was directed at him. And I recognized that in that process that I was being made an example of, but not by my boss. God was making an example of me, and not a bad example. He was saying, here is the right way to handle difficult situations and difficult people in difficult situations. What Sam is doing is correct. What she's doing is wrong. And everybody in the building knew it. They could see it. I didn't have to say a thing. And as long as I viewed and understood that he was the focus of the attack and not me, it really relieved me of any desire or need to retaliate, to get vindication, or to respond in kind. What I also saw was some similar behaviors being directed at others. And when I saw those type of things directed at others, then, the hair did get up a little bit on the back of my neck. But there again, I looked for ways to encourage and strengthen them more so than attack her, because I knew that anything that I did, even if it was in their defense, would be viewed as an attack on my part. And so I really didn't have that option available to me. But there is a difference between how you respond when the aggression is against yourself as opposed to when it's against somebody else. And keeping those things straight is really what enabled me to keep my focus in the proper direction. And so then I just simply modeled that and expected that from those who were still reporting to me. And even those who had been reporting to me and got moved to the other guy, I still was able to influence them by talking about it and saying, you know what, I'm not going to talk about that. Let's talk about this other thing, right? Let's keep focused on the technical problems that we have. How I'm being treated or what I think about this, that, or the other thing doesn't matter anymore. This is what the situation is. And so this is how we need to move forward.
Yeah. So with that faith that you have and understanding that the attack wasn't directed towards you, you were just kind of the object of the direction of the attack. And then things started happening with your wife.
Right.
Was that at the same time?
Yeah, this was all going on at the same time. And in fact, I was, because it was all coming out of COVID there. After the metastatic diagnosis, she went on a drug that was effective for about a year. And when it stopped working, that kind of surprised me. It shocked me actually, because I hadn't understood, that sounds pretty naive, but it didn't dawn on me. I didn't realize that these drugs would stop working after a certain point in time because the disease adapts, modifies. And so when the first drug stopped working, the oncologist that had been with us for about 6 years said there was nothing more she could do for us. And she had to refer us to a trial oncologist. And I felt betrayed. My wife is an outlier, and she has been throughout this entire thing. Doesn't matter what the studies say. If 99% of the people respond to something this way, she's going to be the outlier. She even had a surgery to transplant some lymph nodes that had been removed from underneath her arm when she had her mastectomy. And that creates a condition called lymphedema, where fluid builds up in the arm. If the lymph nodes aren't there to pump that fluid out, then the arm can swell, cuts off blood supply to the tissue, and eventually it dies. And people actually had limbs amputated because of lymphedema. So you have to keep on top of it. And the surgeon that did the transplant warned us that most people still have to wear a compression garment on their arm, even though, the transplanted lymph nodes, start to help. Well, in her case, those little suckers went to town, and we were one appointment away from him telling her that she didn't have to wear the sleeve at all anymore. And that's when we got the metastatic diagnosis, and all the drugs and all the other stuff, they kind of amplified the lymphedema. And so that went out the window. So I was just crushed by the fact that this doctor, who had to learn about all of her idiosyncrasies, was not going to be with us anymore. And I also was faced with some other realities. First of all, a trial doctor means trial drugs. And when you're part of a drug trial, that means that you're taking a risk that you're not going to be part of the group that's actually getting the treatment. You may be part of the control group. And so when you take a 50-50 chance on whether you're even going to treat your disease, that says something about where you are in that process and what you're valuing. You're valuing the advancement of science and helping other people down the road more than trying to solve your own problem. And I didn't like that very much. And it also meant that the reality of death was not just a possibility, it was an imminent thing. And we were getting to the point where we were able to start putting numbers to it. And that was crushing to me. And at first I thought I was just kind of dealing with anticipatory grief, and to some extent I was. But then a friend approached me at a party, and he wanted to know how I was doing. And I gave him some answer, rattling off the medical history or whatever, right? And very kindly, he said, "Well, how were you dealing with the weight?" And I was like, "What?" I was kind of taken aback a little bit. And then instinctively, this kind of came out of my mouth without really me controlling it. I said, "Well, to be honest with you, the heaviest part of the weight is the wait, waiting for my wife to die." And I got to a point where I was just like, you know what? To kind of quote Charles Dickens from A Christmas Carol, if they would rather die, they'd better hurry up and do it and decrease the surplus population, right? That was kind of my attitude towards it. If she's going to die, let's just get it over with, because I can't live under this, constant sort of Damocles hanging over our heads. And realizing that that's how I felt about it was equally crushing, because that's an awful thing to think about your spouse. And it's even worse to have to be able to admit it. And that's where I was. And so that's when I really started digging in to try to find out some answers.
I can only assume your faith is what keeps you going and being able to handle what you're dealing with and going through on a daily basis. Because I see the sign behind you that says "Be anxious for nothing." Oh, that's easy to say, it's easy to read, but when you're looking at a loss of a job, possibly medical insurance, you got the trial drugs going on, I could only imagine, like, I got goosebumps even thinking about the amount of anxiety that would cause me, right? So how do you implement that of you know what, God has got this?
Well, I have to admit, I don't always do it well. In fact, just about a week ago, I woke up one morning and I was getting ready. I had an interview with another podcaster on my docket that day. And so I needed to be on my game, and I wasn't. I woke up scared to death. Our Cobra coverage from my termination ends tomorrow. I haven't had a solid job lead in months, even though I've been actively searching for them. And the one way I thought that God was going to provide fell through. And I panicked. I started thinking about, how am I going to pay for the drugs? Well, forget the drugs. How am I going to pay the mortgage? Right? The savings that we've been living on is running out. And I started thinking, man, they're going to foreclose on the house. And so I got to sell it so I can at least salvage the equity. But how am I going to sell it? It needs work before I can put it on the market. I don't have money for that. I don't have time for that. Do it over the holidays. Are you kidding me? And then to get it sold. And then even if I do that and we downsize, I'm still going to probably have to finance something. How am I going to get anybody to loan me any money? How am I convince anybody to loan me $20? I don't have a job. And okay, so I got to rent, but how am I going to even fill out a rental application? I don't have a job. right? And I was like, I was spiraling so badly that I actually got in the shower and turned the water on so that my sobbing would not wake up my wife. That's how bad it was. And I'm standing there and I'm thinking, this is not good. This is not right. Okay, Sam, what do you do? Well, I went back to the principles that I talked about in the book. God is good. That's all he can be. He doesn't lie. He keeps his promises. He said he's going to provide. That means he's going to do it. He's not playing games with me. I don't have to try to hang on until the situation gets desperate. It's already desperate. We're way past desperate. And somehow recognizing that the situation was completely out of my control allowed me to let go of it. And the peace returned and I calmed down and I was able to think about it. And I was able to meet with the podcaster and I told her the exact same story I just told you. In my book, I talk about the last chapter is all about how to wait better, how you improve at these skills. And I think it is a skill. I think it is a discipline. Learning to wait well is a discipline that you can learn. And there are several things that I talk about. You have to stay present in God's word. You have to, if you're going to say that his thoughts are higher than our thoughts, then you got to be thinking his thoughts. So you've got to stay in the scriptures. You've got to talk to God openly and honestly, like I was doing in the shower. I was screaming for help. I was out of control and I knew it. And then you have to rely on his character. That it's one of the things I talk about is that it's very difficult, even for ourselves, to understand if what I'm expressing is rebellious or just desperate throwing myself on his mercies, right? To the point that sometimes I can't even tell the difference. Well, there's a verse in Hebrews 4 that says that the word of God is quick and powerful, sharper than a two-edged sword, and is able to divide bone from marrow and the thoughts and intents of the heart. God's word enables us to be that thermostat, that temperature gauge that tells us whether we're actually being rebellious or we're not. And I've needed that on more than one occasion. Lastly, I would say community. You can't do this by yourself. You have to be willing to talk about it. And what I've found is that my transparency and my inability to handle things on my own helps others, which is one of the reasons I love doing shows like this, because I know that there's somebody out there right now listening to this who's may very well be in a worse situation than what I am. And being able to say, I have genuine peace. This is not an act. In fact, I met some former colleagues for lunch a few months ago, right after the book was released. And I hadn't seen them in several months. And we showed up at a place for lunch. And one of the guys who I know doesn't believe in Jesus the way I do, he looked at me and he said, "How you doing, Sam?" He says, "You know what?" He says, "You look content." And I said, "Well, you know what, man? I am content." And that kind of genuineness is not only refreshing for people, it's encouraging. And it proves that the principles that I talk about and the principles that I believe work. As we went through the whole editing process for the book, you've got to reread it several times because the edits come back and all that kind of stuff. And every time I had to do that, I found myself in some other situation. There was something going on with the job search. There was something going on with my wife. There was something going on somewhere else where I was feeling it. And I had to sit down and I had to read this book. And I started telling people, listen, you really need to read this book. The author knows what he's talking about. I just wish I could be more like him. It's my book, but I don't even live up to it myself all the time. And I think that's just proof of the power and the efficacy of the principles that are there. So yeah, being involved in a community where you can share that and where you can say, you know what, I fell here, but this also helped me. It encourages people.
No, I absolutely, completely agree with that. And, you were talking and I was thinking about, the community aspect of it and how it encourages people. When you were writing the book, I would assume you never thought that you would write something and somebody else who would read it and provide you some feedback on the book go, you know what? I thought the exact same thing, or I felt the exact same way. Thank you for not making me feel crazy.
Yeah, I did share a lot with my small group at church. And in fact, the diagrams that are in the book that kind of explain this what I call the waiting wheel, which is this whole circular pattern of spiritual growth, is actually a direct result of a conversation that we had during small group. But yeah, when I wrote the book, I thought, okay, I'll put it out there. People will buy it and they'll be helped by it, but I'll never hear. I'll never know what's going on out there. I just kind of didn't expect. But the opposite has been the case. It has been so encouraging to me to to get the feedback of people that have not only just read it and said, I liked it. It's not I pat the Sam on the back kind of a thing. But when you hear them actually using the language, when you hear them talking back in terms of the principles and using some of the lingo, and it means that they've internalized it. I had one lady whom I still have never met say that has a sister who's has a problem with alcohol, was going into rehab for the umpteenth time. Every time she comes out, she goes right back to the bottle. And you can just imagine the drain that that puts on a family. And she said, this time I'm not going to go chase her. I'm going to view this as a season of waiting, and I'm going to trust God to take care of it. Wow. That was just amazing. Then she turned around and told me that she had taken 40 pages of handwritten notes. It's a 200-page book, Tim. It's not that big. She basically rewrote half the book, and I don't know what she jotted down, but that's how it touched her. And that's what I hear time and time again. It's not a difficult read in terms of being hard to understand or using big words or that kind of thing. But a lot of people have described it as a difficult read because it makes you think. You've got to process it. And if you do, you go, wow, it does work like that. And that is reassuring for both me and for others when you get that feedback, said, no, this isn't just, Sam being super positive and always seeing, the shiny side of the coin or whatever, right? If you knew me personally, you'd know that I'm quite the other way. I actually have told my friends and my people who work for me that the problem with optimists is that they can never be pleasantly surprised. So that's not typically how I roll. So this has actually been, this is genuine transformation, and I'm seeing genuine transformation in the lives of others as a result of it, and that is just to me additional proof that it's real.
Yeah, I love reading books, especially ones that say, you're going to be transformed if you read this book. And then every time you read the book, you catch something different, not because the words on the page are different, but because something inside of yourself is different and your brain has processed something a little bit different on a different higher level to go, wait, I didn't catch this one nuance before.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
it sounds like this is it, especially since you wrote it and you're like, wow, I need to keep reading it again.
Yeah, I do. So yeah, and that experience is not just unique to me, right? It does happen for other people, and some have even suggested that it helps to get the print book and the ebook and then read along with the audio, because I narrated that myself, and so you're gonna get the double whammy. You're gonna get how I actually put it on paper and how I meant it to be heard out loud. Um, and I'm happy when people do that. It's the big thing for me is really about the life transformation that happens. If you're inspired, if you're motivated, if you've got to sit there and read it 5 times in order to get it, that you get it is the great part, not how many times you read the book, because I don't get any additional brownie points for that. And that really wasn't the whole point. The whole point was other people need to hear this. Other people need to learn from it. And it's not really the kind of thing where I followed this little, I followed this little path, this little system, this little trick, and all of a sudden life was better. No, it's everybody's situation is different. And that's what's so powerful to me about genuine biblical hope, is that it can meet everybody exactly where they are, exactly in their circumstances. And yes, the general process is the same for everybody, but it's the ability for it to speak into the nitty gritty detail of each one of those circumstances that really makes this unique. And so that's what I hope happens in people's lives.
Absolutely. So if you're struggling with waiting and you're having the deal with the weight of weight, you're going to go in the descriptions of this episode. The links are going to be there. Everything that you can reach out to Sam is going to be there as well. And any season of weight, right, Sam? So
yeah, I mean, so obviously the clear hooks are cancer, joblessness, because that's That's what my story is. But I've known people who have used it to help them through having to deal with aging parents, with special needs children, both young children and adult special needs children, with infertility, with miscarriage, with business pressure. I mean, you go on, you name it. In fact, one of the things I talk about in the book, waiting is ubiquitous. It is everywhere. And it's something that God intentionally built into the fabric of the universe. And he did it on purpose. I haven't yet met anybody who said, no, you're wrong, Sam. I don't hate waiting. I enjoy waiting. Right. I think you'll be hard pressed to find a challenging, difficult situation where these principles don't apply. SamWegner.com.
Awesome, Sam. You read a lot of books about people who are going through things from like the illness perspective or the disability perspective, but nobody really talks about the pain and the pressures that go with the people supporting the
Mm,
family
mm,
and everything else around waiting.
yeah.
Everyone listening to this, go to the description. Everything will be there. Reach out to Sam. You heard it from him. He wants to talk to you. So, Sam, is there anything else?
Everybody who believes that, has that kind of perspective, has their own reasons for thinking that way. I would just challenge you. I know that your life situations aren't any different than anybody else's. And in a lot of cases, the reason that you don't believe in God is probably due to something really bad and awful that's happened to you in your life. I would challenge you to put that bias down for a minute and pick up this book and read it and just say, what if this is true? What if it really does work like this? Would this make a difference in my life? And if you want to debate it with me after that, you know how to get a hold of me. But I think that even though the book definitely assumes that you start from that premise that you believe that there's a God, I think there may be something here even for those who don't. And I just offer it as I just offer my life as proof. If it could change me, if it could help me deal with the types of things I talk about in that book, I think maybe you should consider it.
Well said, Sam. And everyone listening, thank you for stopping by and checking this episode out. And Sam, thank you so much for joining
Thank
us.
you for having me, Tim. I appreciate it.
Thank you.